Right, wheelbase. The wheelbase plays a major role in the characteristic of a motorcycle. It affects how tightly a bike wants to turn through a corner, how the bike is going to pitch, and also just affects the overall stability and agility of the bike. My name's Aaron from 01 Racing, and in this video we're going to be looking at wheelbase, what it is, the effect it has on the bike, and why, when adjusting it for racing, there may be more to it than you think. So let's start by looking at what the term wheelbase actually refers to. Wheelbase is the horizontal measurement from the front wheel contact point to the rear wheel contact point. So when compared with something like trail, the measurement itself is actually quite simple. But what effect does it have on the bike? Wheelbase plays an important role in the directional stability of a bike. This is the tendency for the bike to want to stay aligned in the direction of travel, so increasing the wheelbase will generally make the bike more directionally stable. Another important factor here is the trail, so this must be considered along with the wheelbase when discussing the stability. The wheelbase also plays a crucial role in how much the bike pitches. This is because when braking or accelerating, load is transferred from one wheel to the other. So when we accelerate, load is transferred to the rear wheel, and when we brake, load is transferred to the front wheel. The amount of load that's transferred is proportional to our centre of gravity height and inversely proportional to our wheelbase. So the longer our wheelbase is, the less load is transferred during braking and acceleration, and the shorter our wheelbase, the more load is transferred. The same is true, but the other way around, for centre of gravity height. So a higher centre of gravity will give us more load transfer, and a lower centre of gravity will give us less load transfer. So when analysing how much load transfer there will be, it's important to consider the combined effect of both the wheelbase and the centre of gravity height. In ZeroChassis, this parameter is called the centre of gravity height percentage, because it's the centre of gravity height as a percentage of the wheelbase. So for a bike with a centre of gravity height of 700mm and a wheelbase of 1400mm, the centre of gravity height percentage will be 50%. The higher this value is, the more load transfer the bike will experience for a given braking or accelerating force. More load transfer to the front during braking will result in the bike pitching more to the front. But during acceleration, it's a bit more complicated as to whether the bike's rear suspension will compress or extend, and this is because it's a result of the anti-squat characteristic of the bike, but we'll look into this more in a different video. Wheelbase also influences how tight or how wide a line the bike wants to follow around a corner. So a shorter wheelbase will allow the bike to turn tighter for a given steering angle. The effects that wheelbase have on the bike are a compromise, and the manufacturer will have designed the wheelbase along with the rest of the bike's geometry to give the bike certain handling characteristics, and also to be able to handle the power of the bike and the type of riding that the bike will be subjected to. So, in racing, when adjusting the wheelbase, things can get a bit complicated. One reason is because to alter the wheelbase we have to make a physical change on the bike, and most of these changes will have major knock-on effects in other areas. And sometimes these knock-on effects can be even more significant to the bike than the change in wheelbase. So let's start with the most common adjustment to change the wheelbase, which is changing our swing arm length. If we make the swing arm longer, this will move the rear wheel further away from the bulk of the mass, which will change our weight distribution as it effectively takes load off the rear and puts more on the front. Changing the swing arm will also change our link ratio by affecting the amount of leverage that the rear wheel has over the rear shock. So if we make the swing arm longer, there will be more leverage, and therefore the rear wheel rate will be softer, and vice versa with a shorter swing arm. So if the change to the swing arm length is big enough, it may require the rear suspension to be adjusted to compensate for this. Also, because we've changed the wheelbase without changing our centre of gravity height, this will affect the amount of load transfer that we have during braking and acceleration. So if you wanted to try a different wheelbase but you want to keep the load transfer the same, make sure to adjust the height of the bike to keep the centre of gravity height percentage the same. So as already mentioned, if you change the swing arm length, then we're going to be changing the weight distribution of the bike. But what we can do to compensate for this will depend on the bike you have and the adjustments you have available. Some bikes now have adjustable headpipe inserts, which allow us to move the whole front assembly forwards or backwards in the headpipe. So this means if we wanted to change our swing arm length by a certain amount, we could also make the same change but in the opposite direction to the front assembly of the bike, therefore keeping the weight distribution over the wheels the same. So from a practical point of view, Changing the swing arm length is also made complicated because you can't just choose any swing arm length you want. You have to adjust in set increments, which are dictated to you by the chain pitch. So for the same front and rear sprocket setup, you'll have to add links to make the swing arm longer and take away links to make the swing arm shorter. Some race teams will carry different pitch, chains and sprockets, which gives them more possibilities to achieve the desired swing arm length, gearing and the anti-squat characteristics that they want from the bike. Virtually any change to the chassis position will have some effect on the wheelbase. So there are other things that we can adjust to change the wheelbase, but it's always necessary to consider the knock-on effects that these are having. And this is why it's so useful to use software like ZeroChassis, which will show you these knock-on effects and how significant they are. You can also easily view the different swing arm and gearing options available to you using the built-in gearing calculator. So to briefly sum up, a longer wheelbase will likely give more stability, while a shorter wheelbase will likely give more agility and tighter turning. When adjusting the wheelbase, make sure to consider how the centre of gravity location, both in the X and Y direction, are changing as a percentage of the wheelbase. So I hope this has helped you to better understand wheelbase. Make sure to subscribe and follow 01 Racing on social media for our latest content. And if you're involved in racing and you want to check out ZeroChassis, I'll put a link to our website in the description below. Thanks for watching.